The penthouse in the heart of Manhattan glowed quietly, bathed in the cold light of an overcast afternoon. Its tall, glistening windows stretched from floor to ceiling, as if to assert its dominance over the skyline, a fortress of solitude. Everything in it was immaculate, untouched by time or dust. The sleek furniture, the expensive art pieces, the delicate plants, all arranged with the precision of someone who demanded perfection. Emma stood in the middle of the vast living room, a woman of 43, with tired eyes and calloused hands. She had been cleaning high-end apartments for years now, but there was something about this place that unsettled her. It wasn't just the stark, polished luxury that surrounded her. It was the silence, the kind that seemed to swallow up sound, making the air heavy and thick with secrets. She moved methodically, wiping down the glass tables, dusting the sculptures that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than someone's home. She had been in this penthouse several times before, but something today felt different. Maybe it was the rain outside, or the fact that the building seemed unusually quiet. Or maybe it was because today she discovered something that would change everything. It was a small, seemingly insignificant detail at first. As she reached a corner of the room, her eyes fell on something odd. A photo frame turned upside down. Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should touch it, but her curiosity won out. Gently, she flipped it over, revealing a picture of a young girl with wild curly hair and bright eyes. The girl looked about 8 or 9, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her. Something about the expression on her face struck Emma deep in her chest. For a long moment, Emma stood frozen, her heart beating faster. The girl in the photo looked so much like her own daughter Isabella. The same dark eyes, the same wild curls, the same look of quiet resilience. But how could it be? Her fingers trembled slightly as she stared at the image. Adrian Vale, the elusive billionaire owner of the penthouse, had never mentioned a daughter. Emma had never even seen a hint of anyone else living in this apartment. It was always just him, the reclusive genius of the tech world, who had disappeared from the public eye for years, only to re-emerge with a fortune too vast to comprehend. He was known for his brilliance in artificial intelligence, but little else. She swallowed, trying to steady her breath as she placed the frame back on the table, half wondering if her eyes had betrayed her. Just then, the sound of a door opening startled her. She turned, and there he was, Adrian Vale, stepping into the room from his private office. The moment their gazes met, the atmosphere shifted. Something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition perhaps. His face, usually calm and controlled, betrayed a fleeting flicker of something far less composed, panic. His eyes locked onto the picture she had just placed back, and in an instant, the air in the room became charged, tense. He took a step closer, his jaw tightening as he reached for the photo, his hand trembling ever so slightly. "Where did you find this?" His voice was low, hoarse, almost as if he was choking on the words. There was no anger in his tone, no accusation, but something far deeper, something far darker that Emma couldn't quite place. "I was just cleaning," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was hammering in her chest. "But the girl in this photo looks just like my daughter. She's Isabella. My Isabella." Adrian's face went pale, his eyes widening as he took a step back, his gaze flickering nervously around the room, as if he were searching for an escape. The seconds stretched out like an eternity. Emma's pulse raced, her mind a blur. This was no coincidence. "No," he whispered, barely audible. "You're mistaken." But Emma could see it in his eyes. The way his fingers clenched into fists, the way his breath came in shallow gasps. She knew then that he recognized the girl. But why was he lying? And why did it feel as though they were both standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than either of them could handle? Before she could say another word, Adrian turned sharply and left the room without another glance. The door to his office clicked shut behind him, but Emma remained frozen in place, staring at the photograph on the table, her mind racing. Her thoughts churned wildly as she tried to make sense of everything. Was this just a strange coincidence? Or was there something more? Something buried in the past that neither of them could avoid? Why was he so terrified? What was Adrian hiding? She glanced around the apartment, the walls suddenly closing in on her. It was as though the entire place had become a labyrinth of unanswered questions. That night, long after she had finished cleaning and left the penthouse, Emma sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, her eyes fixed on the dim light of the street outside her window. She had barely touched her dinner. She couldn't. Her mind kept returning to the photo, to that little girl, to the twisted feeling that something was not right. And then the memories flooded in. 20 years ago, her daughter Isabella had gone missing. One moment she was there playing in the park near their apartment in the city. The next moment, she was gone, just like that. The police had searched high and low, but there was no sign of her. A week later, Emma found her huddled in a corner of the park, unconscious and trembling, as though she had been through something unthinkable. The doctors had never been able to explain what happened to her. Isabella had never spoken about that day, and Emma hadn't pushed. It had been a closed chapter, something they had all tried to move past. But now, with the photo in her hands, everything was different. The unanswered questions, the chilling emptiness of those missing days, suddenly felt like they were staring her in the face. Was it possible that Adrian Vale's world had somehow been connected to Isabella's disappearance? Emma leaned forward, her hands shaking as she wiped away a tear that had escaped her eyes. She had to know the truth. She had to understand why that photo existed, why Adrian had lied. The next morning, when Emma returned to the penthouse, she was determined to get answers. As she stepped into the building's lobby, her heart was pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she would find, but she knew one thing for certain: the world she had stepped into had just become much darker than she could have ever imagined. When Adrian greeted her at the door, his face was expressionless, his eyes guarded, but she saw it a flicker of recognition, a flash of something deep and old. And in that moment, Emma knew that the man standing before her was no longer just a billionaire reclusive genius. He was a man with a past that was intertwined with hers in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. "Adrian," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes searching. "We need to talk about the girl in the photo." His lips tightened, but this time he didn't walk away. This was only the beginning. Something far more complex, far more dangerous was unfolding. And as Emma stood there facing Adrian, she realized one undeniable truth. She was no longer cleaning up after other people's messes. She was cleaning up her own past, a past that was about to collide with her future in ways she could never have predicted. The game had changed. The morning sun filtered weakly through the sleek windows of Adrian's penthouse, casting long, thin shadows across the polished floors. Emma stood at the door, her hands still lingering on the cold brass handle. The hum of the city outside felt distant, as though the world beyond this glass fortress had ceased to exist. The silence inside the apartment was suffocating. Adrian hadn't invited her in, but neither had he told her to leave. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, crackling between them. "I'm not here to judge you," Emma said, breaking the quiet. Her voice was steady, but the words came with more weight than she'd intended. It wasn't just a matter of seeking answers anymore. It was a matter of understanding. Understanding why a stranger's face in a photo could change the course of her life, and why the man standing in front of her seemed like the key to unraveling a past she had tried so hard to bury. Adrian stood motionless, his back to her, staring out of the large windows that overlooked the city. His posture was rigid, as if every muscle in his body was straining against something, against her, against the truth, against himself. "Then why are you here?" His voice, soft, but with a sharp edge, pierced the stillness. It was an honest question, one that made Emma flinch inwardly. She hadn't prepared for that, for his rawness, for the hurt in his tone. She had expected anger, maybe, but not this, not vulnerability. "I don't know," she admitted, taking a step closer. "Maybe I just need to understand why I'm standing here looking at a photo of a little girl who could be my daughter in a home that's not mine." Adrian didn't turn to face her. His hands gripped the edge of the windowsill, his knuckles white with tension. "I don't have the answers you're looking for," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And for a moment, Emma wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. "And maybe it's better that way. Maybe you're better off not knowing. Better off." Emma's voice cracked, a small spark of frustration igniting within her. "Better off. You can't just say that, Adrian. You can't just hide behind those walls of yours and tell me to forget. If you want me to leave, just tell me. But don't pretend like this doesn't matter." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Adrian's shoulders stiffened at her outburst, but he didn't move. The moment stretched long, both of them standing there in the tension, unwilling to break it. But then, after what felt like an eternity, Adrian finally turned. His face was pale, drawn. His eyes were hollow, like the life had been sucked from them. And for the first time, Emma saw it, the weight of guilt, the burden of something far darker than she could have imagined. "You don't understand," he said, his voice hoarse, almost a plea. "I never wanted any of this. I didn't ask for her to be a part of my life. I didn't ask for any of this to happen." Emma's chest tightened at his words. Something in his tone struck a chord deep inside her. The anger she had felt moments before began to waver, replaced by something softer, something more vulnerable. She took a step toward him, her own feelings swirling like a storm she couldn't control. "You didn't ask for her." Emma echoed softly, the words carrying more pain than she'd expected. She was talking about the girl in the photo, the girl who looked like Isabella, but there was more to it than that. There had to be more. "But you took her in, and then you pushed her away." His eyes flickered like the mention of Isabella's name was a razor against his skin. He looked away again, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching at his sides. "I never wanted to hurt her," Adrian said, his voice barely audible now. "But the truth is, she was never supposed to be a part of my life. She was never supposed to exist in my world." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. The room felt colder, the air heavier. She had been expecting an answer, but not like this. What did he mean by that? Why was it that he seemed so detached from his own past? "Who is she, Adrian?" Emma asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Who is she really? The girl in the photo. Who is she to you?" Adrian's gaze faltered. A moment of weakness crossed his face, something raw and unguarded. He inhaled deeply, as though preparing himself for something he'd long since buried. "She's my daughter," he said, the words sounding almost foreign coming from his mouth. "But not in the way you think." Emma took a step back, the ground beneath her, suddenly feeling unsteady. His daughter. But how could that be? He had never mentioned her before. He never even spoke of family. And the photo, the girl looked so much like Isabella. But there was no way. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice shaking. "How is that even possible? Why would she be in your house? Why would you keep her a secret?" Adrian closed his eyes briefly, as though gathering strength before he spoke again. "I never wanted her to be part of this world. My world. She wasn't supposed to be born. She was a result of a mistake I made when I was young. A part of me that I didn't want to remember, didn't want to acknowledge." Emma stared at him, her mind racing to piece together the broken fragments of his words. What mistake? And why had he abandoned her? Why had he pushed this girl, his daughter, into the shadows, into the darkness of his secretive world? You didn't want her, Emma said quietly, her voice laced with sadness. But she's still your daughter, Adrian. Whether you wanted her or not, she's still your blood. And now she's a part of this. She's a part of everything you've built. And that doesn't just go away. Adrian's face twisted with pain, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He moved toward the window again, his back to her. His breath was shallow, like every word was a weight too heavy to bear. I never meant to hurt anyone, he murmured almost to himself. But I did. I hurt her. I hurt all of us. And now, I don't know how to make it right. There was a long, charged silence between them, both of them, grappling with the rawness of what had just been said. Emma felt the walls between them starting to crumble, but in their place, a chasm had opened deeper than either of them could have imagined. Adrian was not the man she had thought him to be. He wasn't just a genius billionaire hiding behind a facade of wealth and control. He was a man who had made decisions, wrong decisions that had shaped his life and the lives of those around him. And now those decisions were coming back to haunt him. Adrian. Emma began, her voice softening. What happened to her? The girl in the photo. Where is she now? His gaze flickered briefly toward her before turning back to the city below. His expression was unreadable. She's gone, he whispered. I don't know where she is anymore. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never be able to forgive myself for what happened. The finality of his words hung in the air like a death sentence. Emma's heart ached for him, but there was no time for sympathy. The storm was only just beginning. The truth was, there were far more questions than answers, and Emma knew that this was only the beginning of something much darker. The more she learned, the more she realized that the story between them wasn't just about a father and his lost daughter. It was about her, about Isabella, and the connection between their pasts that was too twisted to ignore. Emma knew she couldn't walk away now. She couldn't walk away from the truth, not when she was standing so close to it. But she also knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. As Adrian turned away from the window, his face shrouded in uncertainty, Emma made a silent vow to herself. She would not let this rest. She would not let the ghosts of their pasts consume them. And with that, she took a step closer, not just for answers, but because somewhere deep inside, she could feel that the world they had both tried to bury was about to resurface. And when it did, everything would change. The storm was coming, and neither of them was ready for the flood of truths it would bring. The following days blurred into one another, as if time itself had become suspended in the tension that hung between Emma and Adrian. The penthouse, once a grand, sterile sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Each room was a cage not of metal, but of secrets, memories, and unspoken truths. Every glance between them was a puzzle piece, falling into place. But the puzzle was too vast, too twisted to solve easily. Emma couldn't shake the weight of Adrian's confession. That fragile, broken part of him, he had revealed the part that had been buried so deep, even he seemed unaware of how much it still controlled him. His daughter. A mistake, as he had called it. But Emma knew better now. There was no such thing as a mistake when it came to a child. No matter how hard you tried to erase them from your life, they would always leave their mark. And then there was Isabella, her daughter. Her Isabella. The resemblance in the photo, the haunting similarity to Adrian's daughter tugged at Emma's heart every moment she was in this place. The questions she hadn't wanted to face, the fears she had buried deep within her, came to the surface like a flood she couldn't control. Was her daughter a part of this mess? Was she connected to Adrian in ways she couldn't yet understand? Could it be possible that Isabella had been a part of some experiment just like Adrian's daughter? She didn't know if she wanted the answers. She wasn't sure if she could bear to know the truth. But she had to find out. Adrian had avoided her after that conversation. He withdrew even further into himself, spending long hours locked away in his office, as if trying to outrun the truth. But the silence between them was becoming unbearable. And for the first time, Emma felt the shift. She had come here seeking answers, seeking closure, but now something darker was brewing. One evening, when the soft orange glow of sunset filled the apartment, Emma found herself alone in the kitchen. Her fingers moved mechanically, preparing dinner, though her mind was far from the task at hand. She could feel Adrian's presence behind her, like a shadow she couldn't escape. "You're quiet," Emma said, without turning around, her voice soft. There was no anger in it, only a strange sadness that clung to her words. It wasn't the sadness of someone who had been hurt. It was the sadness of someone who had seen too much too soon. Adrian stepped closer, his footsteps hesitant, almost like he was afraid to intrude on her space. "I don't know what to say to you anymore," he admitted, his voice raw. "There are things I've kept hidden for so long, things I thought I could bury forever." Emma turned then, locking eyes with him. The sadness was there, sure, but there was something more, something that pulled her in, that made her want to reach out and heal the part of him that had been scarred for so long. "What happened, Adrian?" she asked gently, her voice a mere whisper in the heavy air. His gaze faltered, and for a moment, Emma could see the man beneath the facade of the billionaire tech mogul. He wasn't just the cold, calculated genius the world knew. He was a man who had been broken by his own mistakes, who had been consumed by guilt and shame. And in that moment, Emma knew that the walls he had built around himself had nothing to do with power or control. They were built to protect the pieces of himself he feared to lose. "I thought I could keep my past hidden," he said, his voice trembling. "But it's been haunting me, Emma, every day, and I don't know how to make it stop." She took a small step toward him, her heart softening. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "I'm here." Adrian's eyes flickered to hers, and for the first time he let his guard down. His shoulders slumped, the weight of years of silence and denial crashing down on him. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to ask for comfort. But Emma squeezed his hand, grounding him, showing him that it was okay to be vulnerable. "I didn't want to hurt her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I did. I made choices that destroyed lives. He trailed off, his throat closing up. Emma's chest tightened. She knew he wasn't just talking about the daughter in the photo anymore. He was talking about more than that, about all the decisions he had made, all the consequences he had never expected to face. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, her heart pounding in her chest. Adrian took a deep breath, and for a moment Emma thought he wouldn't say anything. But then he spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "When I was younger, I was involved in something I shouldn't have been. A project, an experiment, the same one that the girl in the photo was a part of. It wasn't just about children. It was about using them to advance technology, to test boundaries, to see how far they could be pushed." The words hit Emma like a blow to the chest. She had known there was something dark beneath the surface, but she had never imagined it would be like this. Adrian, the man she had come to know, the man who had seemed so distant and cold, was involved in something so deeply unethical. Her stomach turned as the pieces began to fall into place. The project was supposed to make them stronger. Adrian continued, his voice hollow. "We tested their resilience, their capacity to endure pain, to adapt. But we pushed them too far. And when it all fell apart, I ran. I left the company. I tried to forget. But now I can't escape it. And neither can she. Emma felt sick. The truth she had been searching for was more monstrous than she had ever imagined. Adrian's past was a nightmare not just for him, but for the children who had been experimented on. And now, the echoes of those experiments were following him into the present, into her life. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She couldn't believe that the man standing before her, the man she had begun to care for, had been part of something so monstrous. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the weight of the guilt and the shame he carried. He wasn't proud of what he had done. He had been a part of something that had destroyed lives, including his own. "I didn't know what I was doing," Adrian said, his voice almost pleading now. "I was young, and I was told it was for the greater good. But I know now that there's nothing greater about it." Emma's heart ached for him. She wanted to be angry, to hate him for his involvement, for his silence. But instead, all she felt was a deep, abiding sorrow. Sorrow for him. Sorrow for the children. And most of all, sorrow for herself. Because the man she had begun to care for was as broken as she was, and together they were both trying to piece together the wreckage of their lives. "You can't fix the past," Emma said quietly, "but you can make sure it doesn't define your future." He looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "And how do I do that?" Emma took a step closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "You start by being honest, by making things right, even if it's hard, by facing the consequences of your actions and doing whatever you can to make up for the lives you've affected." Adrian's eyes flickered with a mixture of hope and fear. "And what about you? Will you stay? Even after everything?" Emma didn't hesitate. She had come too far to turn back now. She knew the road ahead would be painful, and there were no guarantees that it would all work out. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. "But you have to fight for it. For her. For all of us." The words were simple, but they held the weight of everything that had happened between them. The past, the pain, the guilt, the hope. They were standing on the edge of something neither of them fully understood, but together they would face it. Together, they would find a way to make things right. Adrian took a deep breath, nodding slowly. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. The storm inside them wasn't over. It had only just begun. But as they stood there, hands entwined, Emma realized that they were no longer two strangers lost in the mess of their pasts. They were partners bound by something stronger than guilt, something more powerful than the weight of their mistakes. They were bound by the truth, and together they would face whatever came next. Days blurred into restless nights. The silence between Emma and Adrian no longer carried the same weight of cold distance, but it wasn't comforting either. There was something new, something fragile that held them together. They were no longer strangers, caught in a web of secrets. But they weren't yet free of their pasts. Adrian's confessions haunted her as much as they haunted him. The guilt he wore like a second skin, the years of running from the truth, they were both suffocating under its weight. Emma had tried to convince herself that she could help him carry the burden. She told herself it wasn't about the man he had been, but about the man he was trying to become. But every time she looked at him, she saw the shadows of a past that refused to stay buried. It was late one evening when Adrian came to her, his face drawn, his eyes a mixture of desperation and resolve. She had been sitting by the large window, watching the city lights shimmer against the darkened sky. The apartment felt empty, even with him standing just behind her. "We need to talk," Adrian said, his voice low, strained. Emma set down the cup of tea she had been absent-mindedly stirring and turned to face him. The air between them felt thick with something unspoken, something that neither of them was ready to confront, but both knew was inevitable. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was already racing. Adrian took a deep breath, rubbing the back of his neck as if searching for the right words. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands fidgeted, as if he were struggling to hold himself together. But Emma wasn't sure if he was fighting to stay composed, or if he was fighting something far more dangerous, the truth. "I've been investigating everything," Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The project, the children, the mistakes I made. I thought I could bury it all. But it's not just my past that's coming back to haunt me. It's Isabella's." Emma's breath caught in her throat, a ripple of fear twisting in her gut. Isabella's name echoed in the air, heavy with implications. She had known that this was coming. She had known that the tangled threads of their past would eventually meet in the darkest corners of their lives. But hearing her daughter's name from his lips made everything feel more real, more dangerous. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she already had a sinking feeling in her chest. Adrian didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he walked toward the desk by the window, his fingers tracing the edge of a manila folder that sat open, half forgotten. The girl in the photo. His voice broke and he paused for a long moment, as if gathering the courage to say what he knew would shatter everything. "She's not just my daughter. She's Isabella's sister. She's your daughter's twin." Emma froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment the world around her seemed to dissolve. The words had no meaning, no context. Adrian's daughter was Isabella's twin. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. But the look on Adrian's face told her everything. He wasn't lying. He was as lost in this revelation as she was. Twin. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief. How is that possible?" Adrian turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. "I didn't know, Emma. I swear to you, I didn't know. When I left that project, when I left everything behind, I didn't know about her. I didn't know she was even alive. I didn't know that she was the one who was taken from me." Her mind was spinning, trying to process the impossible, the absurd. But there was no denying the truth in his words. There was no way he could be lying about this. He was as trapped by this revelation as she was. The pieces of their past, tangled in secrets and mistakes, were finally beginning to fit together. But the picture it formed was one neither of them had been prepared for. "Adrian," she started, but her voice cracked her mind, unable to form a coherent thought. "I was part of the project," Adrian said, quickly stepping closer, his face haunted by the weight of his confession. "And when the project ended, when I ran, I thought everything would stay buried. But Isabella, your daughter, she was taken, Emma. She was a part of it, the same as my daughter. They were supposed to be used in the same experiments." Emma's knees went weak, and she gripped the edge of the desk for support. No, that can't be true," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Isabella, she was just a little girl. She was never part of that. She was," Adrian said, his voice pained, like each word tore at him. "But I didn't know. I couldn't have known. She was taken by the same people, but she disappeared, and I never knew why. Until now." The truth hit Emma with the force of a tidal wave. Isabella, her sweet, innocent daughter, had been caught up in this nightmare, in something far bigger than she could ever have understood at the time. The memories of that day of Isabella disappearing and then returning, pale and broken, flooded her mind. The questions she had never asked, the suspicions she had pushed aside, suddenly all had answers, horrific answers. "She was never supposed to be part of it," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "Neither of them were. But they were connected by a force neither of us understood. And now it's coming to light, and I don't know how to make it stop." Emma's chest felt tight, as if the air itself had turned to stone. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand how this could have happened, how someone could have taken her daughter and experimented on her without her knowledge. But more than that, she wanted to understand. She needed to understand. How had Adrian become a part of this? How had she not known? "You need to tell me everything," she said, her voice steady now but thick with emotion. "Everything, Adrian. I need to know what you were involved in, what you've done. I can't keep living in the dark. Not anymore. Not after everything we've learned." Adrian nodded, his face pale, his expression lost. He didn't fight her. He didn't resist. He couldn't. There was nothing left for him to hide. "I've been trying to stop it," he said quietly. "I've been trying to make things right. But every step I take, every move I make, just pulls us deeper into this mess." The project was bigger than I thought, Emma. It wasn't just a failed experiment. It was a plan, a vision. It was designed to shape the future, to create a generation of people who were stronger, smarter, more adaptable. But at what cost? Emma could hear the desperation in his voice, the plea for forgiveness, for redemption. But it wasn't enough. None of it could be enough. "Adrian," she whispered, stepping closer. Her eyes locked on his. "This isn't just about us anymore. This is about the people you've hurt, the children, and Isabella. She deserves to know the truth. We both do." He nodded silently, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, for the pain I've caused. But I'll make it right. I swear to you." Emma met his gaze, and for a long moment, they stood there, two broken souls, standing on the edge of a past they could never erase. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if they could ever repair the damage that had been done. But she knew one thing for sure. They were in this together now, and together they would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. The silence between them was deafening, but it was no longer the silence of strangers or of unresolved pain. It was a silence filled with something new, something fragile but real, the promise of facing the future together, no matter how dark the path ahead might be. They weren't running anymore. They were walking toward the truth. The air in the penthouse felt different now. Less cold, perhaps, but infinitely heavier. Each step Emma took through the apartment was a reminder of how much had changed, not just between them, but within herself. The person she had been, the woman who was once content to let her life run quietly unnoticed, had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. Someone who was searching for answers in the darkest corners of her past and her future. Adrian had kept his promise. He had shared every detail, every memory, every regret. His words had spilled like a flood, each confession more painful than the last. She had listened absorbed, and yet nothing could prepare her for what they were about to face together. The truth was a cruel thing, Emma realized. It didn't free them. It didn't bring clarity. Instead, it laid bare the rawness of everything they had both tried to ignore. The project, the children, the manipulations, it was all connected. But the more they uncovered, the more they learned, the harder it became to distinguish the lines between what was right and what was necessary. Now, they were in too deep. There was no turning back. And yet Emma wasn't sure if she was ready for what was to come. A few days after Adrian's final confession, Emma found herself standing at the edge of something vast, something unknowable. Adrian had taken her to a secluded part of the city, a place she had never seen before. The warehouse was tucked away in the industrial district, surrounded by the rust and grime of a forgotten past. Inside it was cold, sterile, filled with rows of old equipment, abandoned monitors, and thick dust that hung in the air like a memory. This is where it all started. Adrian's voice echoed hollow and distant. Emma's chest tightened as she looked around. Is this the facility? Yes, he said, his voice strained, as if even the walls of this place held ghosts. This is where they kept the children, where the experiments were done. It's all locked away now, hidden from the world. But it's never gone. Not really. The weight of his words settled heavily in the pit of Emma's stomach. This was where Isabella had been, where Adrian's daughter had suffered. They were standing in the ruins of something far darker than they could comprehend. And yet, it felt like they were on the edge of a precipice, the abyss of all their secrets. Emma looked at him, her heart in turmoil. "Why bring me here?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Because Adrian began turning to face her, his expression unreadable. "We need to go deeper. We need to understand what happened here. I need to know what part of this mess involved Isabella. I need to know the truth. For her, for you, for us." Emma's heart clenched in her chest. She knew he was right. They couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. But the thought of what lay ahead, the unraveling of the final piece of this nightmare, filled her with a sense of dread. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice tight with emotion. "I don't know if I can face what we'll find." Adrian reached out his hand, brushing against hers, the touch warm and grounding. "I'm not ready either," he said, his voice low and filled with a raw honesty that caught Emma off guard. "But I can't live with the unknown. I can't live with the lies anymore. I've already lost so much, Emma. I'm not going to lose you too." The vulnerability in his words struck something deep within her. She had come to understand him in a way she hadn't before. He was a man consumed by his past, by his mistakes. But more than that, he was someone who, despite everything, still believed in the possibility of redemption. And that belief, fragile as it was, had been enough to pull her closer to him, to make her stay. "I'm with you," Emma said quietly, her heart aching with the weight of her decision. "But you need to understand something. It's not just your past. It's mine too. My daughter. Our lives. They've been intertwined in ways I never could have imagined. And no matter what we find here, I don't know if we can fix it. We might never be able to." Adrian's eyes softened as he stepped closer, his hand brushing against her cheek, his touch gentle. "I don't want to fix it," he murmured. "I want to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to make things right." The words hung in the air like a promise, but Emma wasn't sure if they were a promise to each other or to the ghosts that haunted them both. The warehouse was empty now, its dark corners filled with echoes of a past they couldn't outrun. They moved through the space, following the twisted trail of memories and documents Adrian had uncovered. Each step brought them closer to something they could neither deny nor fully understand. The truth, it seemed, was always just out of reach. "We were part of something bigger than we realized," Adrian said quietly, his voice distant as he flipped through a stack of papers, each one stained with years of neglect. Something that had far-reaching consequences. And I don't think any of us realized how much damage we were causing. Emma glanced at him, her gaze soft. "You didn't know," she said, her voice steady, but full of empathy. "I know that now. I've seen the guilt in your eyes. But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change what we're facing." Adrian nodded silently, his face etched with regret. The weight of the past was still there in every line of his face, in every movement he made. But Emma couldn't bring herself to hate him. She couldn't bring herself to be angry anymore. All she felt was exhaustion, a deep, unshakable weariness. "I don't know how we're supposed to move forward from this," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you. If I can forgive myself for not seeing what was happening to Isabella, to my daughter." Adrian turned to her, his eyes full of silent desperation. "Emma, please." But before he could continue, a sudden sound interrupted the air, the faintest crackling of a hidden speaker system. Both of them froze, the hairs on the back of Emma's neck standing up as she turned toward the source of the noise. A voice, faint and distorted, filled the empty space. Isabella. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The name echoed through the warehouse like a ghost. Adrian's eyes widened, his body stiffening as he realized the significance of the word. "What the hell is that?" Emma whispered, fear creeping into her voice. She turned to Adrian, but his face was pale, his lips trembling. "That was her name," he said softly, as if the words themselves had the power to shatter everything. That was Isabella's voice. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. They had known there was a connection between the two of them, but this was something more, something real. "What did they do to her?" "Adrian," Emma demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and terror. "What happened to my daughter?" "I don't know," Adrian said quietly, his voice hoarse. "But we're about to find out." He moved quickly, pressing a button on the wall that had been hidden behind a panel of metal. The wall creaked, and then with a faint hiss, a hidden door slid open. The darkness beyond the door was thick, suffocating, and Emma's heart pounded in her chest as they stepped inside. This was it. The final piece. The answer to everything that had been haunting them. And yet, as they crossed the threshold, Emma knew one thing for certain: no matter what they found, they could never go back. The past was a part of them now, a part they couldn't erase. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the ruins of it all. Something stronger, something real. As the door closed behind them, they were swallowed by the darkness, and Emma could only wonder if they were ready for what lay ahead. The door closed behind them, with a quiet hiss, sealing them into the unknown. Emma's breath caught in her chest, a deep primal fear washing over her. The shadows in the room were suffocating, thicker than the silence between her and Adrian. The faint hum of machinery whispered from somewhere beyond the walls, but nothing could drown out the pounding of her heart. They were standing at the threshold of something neither of them had been prepared for. Adrian's hand hovered by the switch that had opened the door, his fingers trembling. He didn't seem to notice. His gaze was fixed ahead, lost in the darkness, his jaw clenched as if he were bracing for something far worse than the unknown. Emma's mind raced, but there was no clarity to be found. She was numb, consumed by a sensation that seemed to stretch far beyond fear. She had known there would be consequences. She had known there would be moments where the truth would hit harder than she could bear. But this felt like something else entirely. Adrian took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the shadows. Emma followed without thinking, her feet moving of their own accord. Her instincts screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to run from the reality they were about to uncover. But something kept pulling her forward, a mixture of dread and hope. Hope that they could still make sense of the fragments of their shattered lives. The room was vast, a cavernous expanse that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were lined with rows of monitors, most of them dark, their screens cracked and weathered. There were files stacked on tables, old machines gathering dust in the corners. But it wasn't the equipment that caught Emma's attention. It was the one thing that was unmistakable: the silence. The air here was different. It had a coldness that made the blood in her veins run slower, thicker. She could feel it pressing in on her, suffocating her. It felt like the walls were closing in inch by inch, their hands tightening around her throat. Adrian stepped deeper into the room, but Emma lingered just inside the doorway. She wasn't sure she could take another step. Her chest was tight, her body trembling, though she wasn't sure if it was from fear or something darker, something she couldn't name. Isabella, Adrian's voice, cracked through the silence, barely a whisper, but loud enough to send a shiver down Emma's spine. Her name was like a beacon echoing in the cold expanse of the room. Isabella. It had been so long since she had said it out loud, so long since she had let herself think of her daughter in those terms, as a name, as a person, and not just as a memory she couldn't hold on to. Adrian turned to face her, his expression strained, vulnerable. "I need to show you something," he said softly. His voice was raw, as if he had been carrying this weight alone for far too long. The burden of guilt, of truth, was pulling him under. Emma swallowed hard, her mind a jumble of fear and confusion. She nodded, though every instinct inside her was telling her to walk away, to turn back and never look at this place again. But she couldn't. She couldn't leave, not after everything they had uncovered. Adrian led her deeper into the room, towards a table covered with old documents, their edges yellowed and worn. The air was thick with the smell of must and decay. She could barely focus on the papers themselves, though she saw the name, Aurora Project, stamped on each one, the same words that had haunted Adrian's every move, the same words that had nearly destroyed him. He picked up one of the documents, unfolding it with shaky hands. "This is where it all began," he said, his voice thick with regret. "These experiments. They were meant to test the limits of human resilience, but they went too far. And Isabella, she was one of them." Emma's stomach churned. She wanted to look away. She wanted to close her eyes and forget everything. Forget the woman she was becoming. Forget the man standing before her. Forget the truth that felt like it would consume her. But she couldn't. She was drawn to the document in Adrian's hands. She reached out her fingers, brushing against the paper, and for a moment, it felt like she was touching the very foundation of their lives, the point from which everything had spiraled out of control. She stared at the pages, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. She read them aloud without meaning to, her voice trembling. "They did this to her, to my daughter. She was part of this. She was a subject." Adrian's silence was suffocating, his face unreadable as he stood beside her. He didn't need to say anything. His presence, his guilt, his regret were enough. The truth of what had happened to Isabella, to all the children, was too much to process in one moment. The experiment. Project Aurora had stolen their lives, fractured their families, and broken something inside both of them. Emma's throat tightened as she pushed the paper away. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the weight of the words had stolen all her strength. "You lied to me about everything." "I never lied to you, Emma," Adrian said softly, his voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what they were doing. I thought it was a simple project, just a study, just data. But they used the children. They manipulated them. They—" He paused, his voice faltering, the words lodged in his throat. Emma turned to face him, her eyes burning with pain and fury. "You knew they were testing on children, Adrian. How can you stand here and tell me you didn't know?" Her voice cracked, and she stepped back as if the sheer force of her anger was pushing her away from him. "I didn't know it was her," Adrian whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know it was Isabella. If I had known, if I had known." His words trailed off, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and helplessness. Emma's anger faltered, her heart breaking all over again. If I had known. The words echoed in her mind. She had spent so many years asking herself what she had missed, what she had failed to see in Isabella's eyes, in the way she had returned from that day in the park, quiet, withdrawn, haunted. The truth was too painful to bear. Her daughter. She had been one of those children. "I need to find her," Emma said, her voice shaking with resolve. "I need to find Isabella. And I need to make sure she knows the truth. Everything that happened. What you were part of. What they did to her." Adrian stepped forward, his hand reaching out to her, but Emma stepped back. She couldn't bear the touch. Not now. I won't let you take this away from her, she said firmly. This is my fight now. You've done enough damage. I have to protect her. I have to make it right. I won't stop you, Adrian said quietly, his voice filled with regret. But please, don't do it alone. I'll help you. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I owe her that much. Emma shook her head, her tears falling freely now. She didn't know what she wanted anymore. She didn't know how to fix any of this, how to undo the years of pain and betrayal. But she did know one thing. Isabella was still out there somewhere, and she had to find her. She had to make sure she wasn't lost to the darkness forever. As Adrian stood there silent watching her, Emma took a deep breath, a sense of finality settling over her. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns and horrors she could hardly fathom. But she wasn't going to face it alone. Not anymore. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Emma allowed herself to believe just for a moment that there might still be hope. That maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild from the wreckage of everything that had come before. Together. With one last glance at the shadows of the warehouse, Emma turned and walked out into the night, her heart heavy but determined. The search for the truth and for Isabella had only just begun. The city was colder now, even though the air was still thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Emma had walked out of the warehouse, the finality of the night pressing on her chest, but in her heart was a fierce resolve. She wasn't sure where to begin, how to even take the first step toward finding Isabella, toward making sense of everything that had unraveled. But she knew that nothing could stop her now. Adrian's words lingered in her mind. I'll help you. I'll do whatever it takes. She couldn't deny the pull between them, the bond that had grown despite the darkness between them. There was so much hurt, so much anger. And yet there was still something raw and unbroken in the way Adrian looked at her. But no matter how much he wanted to help, no matter how much he tried to atone for the past, Emma knew one thing for sure: she couldn't rely on him. Not yet. She couldn't let him stand in the way of her fight for Isabella. Not after everything they had uncovered. Not after the revelation that Isabella had been one of those children, a part of something far darker than Emma could ever have imagined. Emma stood by the window of her apartment, staring out at the city below the skyline, now dimmed by the rain that had started to fall in steady sheets. The lights blurred, casting reflections on the glass, as if the city itself had become lost in the storm. It felt symbolic, like her own life caught between the darkness of the past and the uncertainty of the future. She hadn't seen Adrian since the night at the warehouse, since she had made the decision to walk away to take control of her own fight. The silence between them felt deafening, but it also felt necessary. There was still too much pain to navigate, too much distance between them that had yet to be crossed. And then there was Isabella, the daughter she had fought to protect for so long. And yet in all these years, there was so much she hadn't known about her. The truth they had uncovered together had shattered the image she had held of her own family, her own life. Isabella was lost in the shadows now, just as Emma had been lost in a world of manipulation and lies. But Emma wasn't going to lose her again. Not this time. Her phone buzzed, breaking through her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her breath catching when she saw the name. It was Adrian. For a long moment, Emma hesitated. She had promised herself she wouldn't reach out to him, that she would do this on her own. But something inside her, something deep and undeniable, made her tap the screen. She answered without saying anything, waiting for him to speak. "I found something." Adrian's voice was low, tight with urgency. "I've found a lead. I think I know where Isabella is." Emma's heart leaped into her throat. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the tension in her body was palpable, every muscle drawn tight in anticipation. "I can't explain everything right now, but I'll meet you. We need to talk." Emma's mind raced as the line went silent. He had found a lead. But how? How could he have uncovered anything they hadn't already discovered in that dark warehouse? She had no answers, but one thing was certain. This was it. The next step. The thing that could finally bring them closer to the truth. She didn't waste any more time. Grabbing her coat, Emma stepped out into the night, the rain pouring down harder, the cold creeping into her bones. But she didn't care. The world outside could drown in its own storm. She had one goal now: to find Isabella, to bring her home. The cafe Adrian had chosen was small and tucked away in an alley just outside of the city's main district. Its dim lights seemed to hum with a sense of familiarity, as if it were trying to soothe them both before they dove into the mess of their pasts. Emma slid into the booth, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. When Adrian walked in, his face was worn, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He was carrying something in his hand, a manila folder that looked far too important, far too fragile. Emma didn't wait for him to speak. She reached for the folder before he could offer it. "Is this about Isabella?" she asked, her voice barely controlled. Adrian nodded but didn't speak. Instead, he slid the folder across the table, his fingers lingering just a moment too long on its edge. Emma opened it without hesitation, the papers inside crinkling as she pulled them free. The first sheet was a document labeled Subject 147, Isabella Martinez. She felt her breath hitch in her throat. Isabella's name, her daughter's name, printed in cold clinical font. It was like a nightmare coming to life. This is her. Emma whispered, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. The documents were filled with notes, dates, times, details of Isabella's participation in the experiment, records of her physical and psychological assessments. The shock of seeing her daughter's life reduced to sterile numbers and observations was almost more than Emma could bear. But she had to keep going. She had to know. "Adrian, what is this?" Her voice cracked, the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. What did they do to her? Adrian's expression was unreadable, his eyes full of something Emma couldn't place. But she could see the guilt, the same guilt that had been there from the very beginning. "I didn't know she was involved in the experiments," he said, his voice tight. "I didn't know about Isabella, not until after everything was over. But they kept files, records. They watched the children. They tracked everything." Emma's stomach churned. She felt like she was drowning in the truth, in the things she couldn't unsee. "So they used her," she said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "They used my daughter, and you didn't stop it. You didn't even know." Adrian flinched, his face tightening. "No, I didn't know, Emma. I swear to you. But I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to find her, to make sure she knows the truth." "The truth," Emma repeated bitterly. "The truth. You think that's going to make it better? You think that's going to fix all of this? No, Adrian. I can't just forgive you because you're trying to make amends. I can't just pretend that this didn't happen." The words hung between them like a weight neither could move. Adrian closed his eyes, and for a moment, Emma thought he might say something, some apology that would make everything clear. But he didn't. Instead, he simply slid the final sheet of paper across the table. Emma stared down at it, her eyes filling with confusion. It was a map, a location marked in red, a building far from the city center. "This is where I think Isabella is," Adrian said quietly. "I traced the records, the movements. This is where she was taken after the experiment ended. This is the last place they kept her." Emma's heart raced. The map was like a lifeline, a thread to follow, a final chance to find her daughter. But even as her hopes surged, a cold fear clutched at her. "I'll go with you," Adrian said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "No," Emma said immediately, shaking her head. "This is mine. I have to do this on my own. You've helped me get this far, but This is the end. This is where I find her. Adrian's eyes softened, but he said nothing more. He didn't need to. They both knew that whatever came next would be their final step, the one that would either heal them or destroy them. Emma stood her decision final. She had everything she needed to find Isabella now. The truth, the location. All she had to do was walk out into the night, into the unknown. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It wasn't about Adrian. It was about Isabella. And nothing, not even the darkness surrounding them, would stop her from finding her daughter. With the manila folder clutched tightly in her hand, Emma walked out of the cafe and into the pouring rain. The storm had swallowed the city whole, but she didn't care. She had a purpose now, a direction. She knew where to go. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally free. As the city lights blurred behind her, Emma's mind raced with thoughts of Isabella. The road ahead was uncertain, but Emma had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. Not anymore. The rain had soaked through Emma's coat, the streets slick and shimmering under the weight of the storm. Her steps quickened almost as if the city itself was pushing her forward, urging her to move faster to reach the end of the road that had taken her through the darkest corners of her life. The map Adrian had given her burned in her pocket, its promise heavy against her skin. She had no idea what she would find when she reached that building. No certainty, only a deep, gnawing sense of urgency. But she knew without a doubt that she couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close. The address led her to a quiet part of the city, one she didn't recognize tucked behind layers of old brick buildings and forgotten alleys. There was no sign of life here, no streetlights, no cars, just silence thick and all-encompassing. And then she saw it. The building was a low industrial structure, its windows long boarded up its entrance. A heavy rusted door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. A feeling of dread settled over Emma as she approached, the weight of it sinking deep into her chest. She stopped in front of the door, her breath quick and shallow. This was it. The place that held the final answers. The answers about Isabella, about everything they had endured. But as her hand reached out to touch the door handle, something held her back. Fear. It was so simple, so visceral. The fear of the unknown, of what might be on the other side, of what she might find. But she couldn't stop now. With one deep breath, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. The creak of metal against metal echoed in the empty space, a sound that felt too loud, too jarring. The room beyond was dim-lit only by the faintest light filtering through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was thick with dust, with the smell of something old and forgotten. Emma stepped inside, her heart pounding. She could hear her own breath in the silence, feel the weight of each step as she moved deeper into the building. It was cold here, too cold, but the chill in her bones had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the quiet. For the first time since she'd started this journey, Emma felt completely, utterly alone. The kind of isolation that stretched through time and space, leaving her feeling like she was trapped in some otherworldly place. Her hand instinctively reached for the pocket, where she'd kept the map, pulling it out once more. She traced the lines of the destination, as if hoping it would guide her, anchor her in this strange place. But even the map seemed irrelevant now. She wasn't sure what she was looking for anymore. And then she heard it. A faint sound, barely perceptible, coming from somewhere further in the building. A rustling. A shuffling. Emma froze, her body tensing, her heart hammering in her chest. Was it someone? Was it her? She moved forward again, more cautiously now, her footsteps quieter, the air thick with expectation. As she rounded a corner, her eyes locked on a door at the far end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, just enough for her to see the faintest outline of something inside. Without thinking, she moved toward it, her breath shallow, her legs feeling like lead beneath her. The closer she got, the more her heart seemed to climb into her throat. It had to be her. Isabella. The door creaked as she pushed it open, and for a moment everything seemed to stand still. The world outside faded away, and there was only this room. A small, sterile space with a single cot in the center, and dim lights that flickered overhead. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Isabella, her daughter older now, but still so familiar. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as if she had been waiting for something, for someone, for Emma. Emma's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes filling with tears as she stepped into the room. Isabella looked up, her expression blank, distant, as if she were still locked in a place far from the world around her. For a moment, Emma was unsure if she would recognize her, unsure if the daughter she had once known was still there. But then Isabella's eyes softened, and a flicker of recognition passed through them. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed caught in her throat, as if the weight of everything she had been through had taken away her voice. "Mom," she whispered, finally, her voice hoarse, broken. Emma's breath hitched, and in that moment the floodgates opened. She rushed forward, pulling Isabella into her arms, holding her as if she would disappear if she let go. "I found you," Emma whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "I found you, Isabella." Isabella didn't respond, but Emma could feel her body tremble in her arms, could feel the weight of everything that had happened to them both, everything they had lost. "I'm so sorry," Emma murmured, holding her tighter. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I didn't know. I didn't know what they were doing to you." Isabella pulled back slightly, her eyes searching Emma's face, as if she were looking for something. "You didn't know?" she asked softly. "You didn't know what happened?" Emma shook her head, her heart breaking. "I didn't know. I couldn't have known. But I'm here now. I'm here to take you home." Isabella seemed to consider this, her eyes distant again, lost in a place Emma couldn't reach. And for a moment, Emma wondered if this would be enough, if finding her daughter would be enough to undo the years of pain, the years of silence, of distance. But as she looked into Isabella's eyes, she realized it wasn't about going back. It wasn't about undoing what had been done. It was about moving forward. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered again, her voice barely audible, as if speaking was the hardest thing she had ever done. "I don't know who I am anymore." Emma reached for her daughter's hand, holding it in her own, feeling the coldness of it. "You're Isabella. You're my daughter. And we're going to find a way to fix this, together." Isabella didn't say anything, but Emma could see the smallest shift in her expression, the faintest spark of hope flickering behind the pain. "I'm scared, Mom," Isabella said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to come back from this." Emma squeezed her hand, her voice steady now, filled with the quiet strength of a mother who had fought too long to lose. "We don't have to come back, Isabella. We just have to move forward, one step at a time." For the first time in years, Emma felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. The road ahead would be long, and it would be difficult. There was no going back to what had been, no way to erase the pain and the betrayal. But there was hope, and that for now was enough. The rain had stopped when Emma and Isabella left the building. The streets were quiet, the world still soaked in the aftermath of the storm. They didn't say much as they walked side by side, the weight of everything still hanging in the air. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was finally moving towards something better, something real. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know what they would find when they finally stepped into the light. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. As they walked down the empty street, Emma squeezed Isabella's hand, and for the first time, Isabella squeezed back. A small, hesitant gesture, but it was enough. Together they were going to rebuild, one step at a time.